Morning everyone. Welcome to the November meeting of the Pensions Committee. We must be doing quite well because I'm sure, as you've seen, there are mince pies outside if anybody needs one. Right, have we any apologies, please?
We just have apologies from Councillor Bonnell. Mr. Goldthorpe has been replaced by Councillor Clark.
Oh, right, okay, so that's members. Right, okay, thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests, anyone? No, okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of September. Are we happy to move those, members? Okay, thank you. I'm not aware, the only thing I think I've got is in respect of the annual report, where we did talk about creating a summary from the annual report, which has been done. It's got to be finalised this week, and basically the header fund will send it out to everybody later on next week. It'll be, and so if anybody's any comments on that summary, you can come back pretty quick, please. Okay. Any other issues on the minutes? Okay, we now go on to the external audit findings report, and we've got Andy is dialing in, and so when you're ready, please, Andy. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just briefly take you through the audit findings report. So from page 11 gives the headlines around the work is substantially complete. There's no significant matters that would require a modification to the audit opinion, so it's a clean opinion. The work, we probably would have been ready to sign the opinion back in early to mid-October, but the pension fund opinion can't be signed until the county is. I believe that's going to happen in December, just before Christmas, with a fair wind. So the only thing that's left really is final bits of tidying up work and receipt of a final signed accounts and signed management letter of rep. So not a great deal left on either side. On page 13 is a little section on the materiality levels, and this confirms that it's the same. We work to the same levels that we reported in the audit plan. Pages 14 to 16 look at the areas we highlighted as significant risks, and concludes we didn't have any findings there on management override of controls or revenue and expenditure recognition or valuation of level 3 investments. On pages 17 and 18 we look a bit more in detail at the work we've done on level 3 and level 2 investments. And we do note we did find some differences, 48 million in level 3 and 6.2 in level 2, and mostly this is due to timing differences. The accounts prepared as of the 31st of March, but due to pressure to preparing the accounts quickly, the fund use accounts for some of the valuations of the investments as of the 31st of December, and so there's always likely to be some differences between the two of those, but they're not material. Pages 19 to 21 looks at other areas we need to report on. There's nothing of any concern amongst all of that. Going concern is straightforward, the fund's well funded. And so then on to page 22, independence. We do IS 19 work and report the fees there. And then Appendix A on page 24, it's we've previously made a recommendation around approval of manual journals, and we've made the same recommendation in the previous 2 years, and we've had the same response back that management feel they have sufficient controls to prevent and detect any fraudulent journals being posted. This is a very common one in public sectors, particularly where there's smaller accounting teams, but it's difficult for there to be the level of controls we'd really ideally like. So I wouldn't say it's a major thing, and it's just something we feel, but it's something, it is a weakness that we feel we need to flag each year. Appendix B on page 25 just goes through just the handful of disclosure changes that we identified, and that is really a short list compared to most of my clients, so that's a credit to the accounts team. We didn't find any adjustments to the main statements in this or prior year, or any unadjusted ones. Appendix C just confirms the fees. Currently, I don't think we're proposing any increase on the fees, but we'll confirm that with the team around the time we sign off. And then Appendix D is the draft audit opinion, which is unmodified and will be pretty much as is in the findings report. So if there's any members with any questions, I'd happily try and answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Clearly, I think this is a pretty good report, but obviously open to question. Jennifer?
Okay, thank you, Chair. First of all, well done to the team. Getting a clean open report is really good. And the journals question, when we've had my colleagues from the council recently, we had exactly the same comment and we gave exactly the same response. So I think the journal question is the flavour this year for everybody. The comment I got really was about the speed, and that came up quite a few times. Speed of the account being done, it came up quite a few times in the report, and you've said it a few times in the presentation then. So what happened this year that was different? Is it something we need to be concerned about? Because normally accounts will follow a standard timeline. If you do this on this day, this on that day. So the speed came up a few times, especially with the closed down evaluations.
Okay. We do have one member of the accounts team on the line today, so I was going to suggest that Paul Dobson or Reece can pick up on this point because they've been heavily involved in it. So, that'd be okay today. So it's Paul Dobson.
Yes, sorry, the mute wouldn't go off. The accounts are prepared in line with the timetables that the county council use, and I don't think it was particularly later or earlier this year than last. I think a lot of the issues just timing with audit as much as anything else, and their workloads. But obviously we do work within statutory timetables of the auditing regulations.
Okay, any other comments? Are you okay with that, Jennifer? No, I think generally it's Councillor Schofield.
Thank you. Just to mention a couple of things. The second one is just clarifying something that has just been talked about then. Firstly, as Andy from Grant Thornton said early on, yes, and I can confirm as chairman of the Audit Risk and Governance Committee that there's going to be a special meeting of that committee to later this in next month, as Andy was indicating, to sign off, to approve and sign off the audited accounts, not just of the pension fund, but of LCC as well. And the second thing is, yes, as Paul Dobson was saying, finance staff very creditably have done all that's been asked of them. In fact, if you look, members of the committee, overall page 19, page 11 of the report, towards the bottom, that part does give some complimentary remarks about the finance staff, and it says there the financial statements were published on 26th of May, more than 2 months in advance of the statutory deadline, which is highly creditable. And I think praise, I apologise if I've said this before at an earlier meeting, praise is due to the the finance team here at LCC for that. As Paul, I think, was alluding to, there have been later deadlines coming temporarily because of COVID last year and this year. But as well as that, Grant Thornton, not untypically with other external auditors, have had to have more time beyond those deadlines. That's why it's not till later next month when the accounts have been finally signed off.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we're asked to note the report, so I'd like to thank Andy and certainly thank the pension team and the finance team for the excellent work. I think it is a very good report. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andy. If we can move on to agenda item 5, which is the budget monitoring report, and I'll hand over to Sean.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee are asked to review the financial results for the 6-month period up to the end of September. Just by way of a recap, we've mentioned in the cover paper that the budget was developed earlier on in the year and brought to the committee in March based on information available at that time. And then as we proceed through the year, we can look at the forecast and adjust to the experience that we actually have as appropriate. Just picking up on some of the key specifics, contribution income is in line with the forecast. You may recall that at the last meeting there was an adjustment made to that. A number of items are in line with what's expected in terms of budget, such as transfers in, benefits paid out, etc. We've noticed a slight increase in benefit lump sums paid out, and that's because there's been more retirement activity than would have been anticipated in the budget. Also mentioned investment income is above budget. And then finally, it's worth picking out that the investment management fees are above budget. This is an issue that we've discussed on a couple of occasions, and we went into detail about the challenge of how we can actually, come up with an estimate and some of the practical challenges that we have in terms of budgeting this. But it does reflect the fact that, as Chris alluded to before, the performance of the investment portfolio has been good, and we see that come through in terms of charges. And then just the final point to pick up on is that we did have prepayment contributions in respect of this year, so that does actually leave us in a good position. And they were the main points really to pick up on, and we can take questions and comments. Thank you.
Asked to review this and note the budget and the forecast for the year. Are we happy to do that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right. Agenda item 6 is feedback from members on pension related training. I'll mention a couple of them. I think the pensions workshop was very good. The PLSA annual conference, I'll come on to Paul in a minute, but I felt very much on the PLSA, it's not quite the same if you're not actually there in a hall and meeting people. I think that really makes the PLSA events very good. I will comment on the last event where myself and Councillor Edmund attended. Basically, that was by Barnett Waddington, and I thought it was an excellent presentation particularly for new members, but members who've been here for a year or many years longer, as in some cases, would certainly learn from that presentation. So we are going to ask them to do it again and give members the opportunity to attend. So, Paul, I don't know if you have any comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to back up what Eddie said. PLSA ones are very good. They made every effort to do it. It was online. One of the benefits of being online, you can actually go back to it if you did miss something, because it's there for a significant length of time. One of the things I did notice is responsible investment has moved definitely under Weather Margins focus a lot of the events that were on. One of the criticism I would make, but that's because it was the annual conference and not the local government conference. There was a bit about defined contributions, quite a bit about that, which isn't relevant to us. But again, if anybody sees anything from PSLA, I would recommend that it attend.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to confirm that at the meeting on 28th of October, on the overview of local government pension scheme webinar was actually an excellent presentation, and from my perspective was an eye-opener, and I'm really grateful for facilitating the meeting, and also thanks the officers and everybody involved for that fantastic presentation. Thank you, Chairman. I can agree with that.
Thank you. I'd just like to remind everybody we will shortly be doing training needs analysis. So I'm sure Mike will be sending some requests to you all to understand, what type of training you need going forward. Okay, any queries? Right, item 7 is LPP annual report and accounts.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Morning, everyone. So for our annual report and accounts this year, we've taken a slightly different approach. Instead of having a glossy, lengthy annual report, we've stuck to the statutory minimum requirements. But what we've done is supplemented that with enhanced information on our website, and also, do I need this? Is everyone hearing okay, or shall I go without the microphone? It's okay, is it? Keep it on. Okay, fine. No problem. Okay. And enhance the information on the website and supplemented it with press releases as well. So that's what you've got in front of you today. In terms of performance across the group, that was positive, representing savings from LPPI and asset growth in LPPI, and LPPA excellent performance during COVID is also noted in the report. From a financial perspective, both businesses performed well, particularly from an operational financial perspective. LPPI made a small profit, and LPPA substantially reduced operational losses against budget. So positive operational performance, but that was clouded by staff LGPS pension liabilities, which results in an overall loss to the group, and that's where you see those losses coming through from an accounting perspective. Optically, perhaps that's not ideal, not helpful from a financial perspective, but I'd like to reiterate that the operational performance of the two subsidiaries was very positive. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Anybody, any questions? Are we happy to note the content of the report? Okay, thank you. Absolutely. Right, okay, we now come on to the responsible investment report, which is very comprehensive, I think, this time.
Yes, so this is the regular report that we receive at committee, and it's an item to note. We do briefly mention in the cover paper the responsible investment policy review, which we'll cover in more detail at the next agenda item. Looking through the remainder of the document, probably the main point to pick up on is an announcement that was made by LPPI regarding their net zero commitments. So this is something that we've discussed in the working group that we've had, a very positive move. Chair, I was just going to say, would you like Chris to give an update on that? That'd be helpful.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, just very briefly, I know you've got a lot of agenda items. So on the point that Sean was just mentioning there, we have publicly announced and we've signed something called the IIGCC. So that's a group of investors and asset managers that are working together to kind of create net zero plans. So we've committed to move the portfolio to net zero. What that practically means in the short term is we are working on something called a climate action plan. That's something which part of the IAGCC framework requires us to publish within 12 months. And what we'll be doing in that is detailing the scope of our commitment, which metrics, what targets we can apply, and also then expanding that year on year. So we recognise that we don't have all the answers. No one, we believe, has all the answers at this stage, but we've got to start aggressively pushing down that pathway. So we will be focusing on most likely some of the more liquid asset classes to start with, and then moving on to the private asset classes in the years ahead. Along to support that, another thing I mentioned in the report there, or Francis mentions, is the expansion of TPI. So that's something called the Transition Pathway Initiative. We've reported on that to you for the last couple of years. However, TPI is an organisation which is changing dramatically now. It's moving from having a budget in the thousands of pounds to the millions of pounds. It's brought in significant external funding. The idea being to expand its coverage from around 400 companies today to over 10,000 companies. And we hope by working with that very closely, we'll be able to start to unlock one of the biggest challenges we have, which is the private market space, as well as expanding the coverage in public markets. TPI's initiatives are to try and kind of find solutions for getting the right data that we all need to look at private markets. The analogy that I drew with someone I was talking to the other day was that this climate action plan is partly a stock take. So we go into the stock room at the moment and we count what's on the shelves and work out what we've got. The private markets are like having a safe. We can't open the safe to really understand what's in there, and that's the real problem we've got at the moment. So hopefully TPI will help us there. Final point I'll make, if you'll give me one more minute, is we're normally reporting PRI to you at this point. So we made our annual PRI submission earlier in the year. PRI unfortunately have had all sorts of problems, so they've informed everyone they're not going to publish the results until next year. They're having a complete overhaul of the database and the way they've tried to analyse everyone's submissions. So unfortunately there's a delay at least until March next year before we'll get the PRI results.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, anyone? Councillor Smith.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I noticed this is a very hot topic with COP26 and everything else in climate emergency. I noticed here we've got your CDP non-disclosure campaign, and you've got here totally engaged. Totally engaged was 9 compared to the reduction of total disclosed is less. Can you just give an update on why that sort of disclosure is less than engaged on there? Page 96.
Apologies for the pause. You've actually kind of, I haven't read into this one. I'm probably going to have to come back to you on that one. I suspect it's nothing untoward, but I'm going to have to come back to you on that one specifically. I don't want to kind of give you an answer off the cuff. I need to speak to the team.
Thanks, Chris. Could I just ask a question? You might have to come back, but when you talk about opening, accessing the private markets or looking, can you just explain what that means in practice? And is there an issue, do pension funds, do we look at that bridge between R&D and bringing some of the sorts of like low carbon solutions to market? Is that something that we are involved in our climate investment sort of portfolio?
Yeah, so very briefly, what I referred to on the private markets is the disclosures that private companies make tend to be very different to the disclosure that public companies are making. So it's difficult to necessarily get some of the same metrics, but also the implementation route in private markets tends to be much more intermediated. So the fund might be invested in a private equity fund. That's through a manager who then has a host of other third companies. So the information that we get back as an investor is very poor compared to the information that we get in the public markets. And that's not unique to us, that's common across the market because there's generally been a lack of focus within private companies to provide this information. That's changing, and everyone's on that pathway now, but the data is just not available. That's what everyone's working on. And the issue you've got is those companies saying, look, we're very happy to provide the information, but what standards do you want us to report to? Because if we report to you on this standard or on your spreadsheet questions and you on those, that's not workable for us. They want something to work to a common standard. And in terms of whether we're kind of investing in climate solutions, for want of a better word, absolutely. I mean, investors will look at that. Clearly, there's a risk and return calculation like any other investment that we have to make. Typically, what people worry about in some of those, I guess, R&D type approaches is the lack of proven technology and whether you end up backing something that turns out to go to zero because it just wasn't the solution. But it's absolutely an area of increased focus for most investors, and certainly for us it is. We're very keen to try and invest in some of those areas where we can get the right risk return profile. But as I said, it's there might be 10 things you can invest in and 7 of them won't work, so you've got to try and work out if you can pick the 3.
Anybody else? I think it is very clear the one thing COP26 has done, and I think it's, basically given the whole market a kick, that they've got to take this extremely seriously going forward, whether it's private, public, whatever. Okay, well, that's to note the report. Happy to do that. Thank you. Item 9, which is the responsible investment policy. First of all, I'd like to thank the 4 members of the working group who've spent quite a lot of time on undertaking this work. I'm just going to ask Sean to briefly introduce it, then I'm going to go over to Alan, who was the chair of the working party, and then let everybody else come in after if they wish. Thank you.
Okay, so the recommendation here is for approval of this policy. In terms of what the requirements are, I've mentioned in the cover paper that there's a requirement to consider factors in investment, including environmental, social, governance, or ESG as we call them. And the way that this can be done, it can either be done as a part of our investment strategy statement, or it can be done as a separate policy that sits beneath or connected with that statement. As many funds do, we've gone with the having a single policy, which is here today for you to review, because we recognise it's such an important issue. Chair's just mentioned the process that we went through the working group. We met on 4 occasions to discuss this, and we also discussed it with the local pensions board as well. And in the cover paper, I've recapped on the aims of the group, which were essentially to review the current policy and to look at, is it in line with current regulations? Is best practice being followed? What changes are required? And then also importantly to look at the dashboard that we use and present to the committee every quarter. And I'll just briefly pick up on the outcomes, but we'll hand over to Councillor Schofield in a moment to elaborate. But the 2 areas that we looked at that are important are the priorities. So these are ESG issues that are important to the fund and that we want to focus our attention on. And they've been outlined on page 113, there's 7 of them there. And then also in terms of the dashboard, the feedback that we got from that, there were 2 types of change that we'll look at in terms of the dashboard. So there's some amendments that we can do to improve the use of it by providing some useful background contextual information that will enable it to be followed a bit easier as a standalone document. And then more substantive than that, what we're going to take away is an action to look at the priorities that have been identified and will be agreed, how are they measured or reflected in the dashboard, and are there any enhancements that are needed there, and we'll bring that back to the committee at the March meeting. So I'll hand over to Councillor Schofield. If that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. And I should just start to remind members who presumably received it that in the meantime there was a sort of clean copy sent out of the updated RI policy that's here for approval. A clean copy in the sense that it was another version of the Appendix A, but without the colour coding in it, so that all the changes that were in yellow are embodied, and all the relocations, if we call it that, movement within the document that were in green are no longer coloured in, so it's that was a clean copy that was sent out to my suggestion. Yes, I would add my personal thanks to the other 3 members of the working group, the Task and Finish group, and also to Sean and his other officers in his team, Mukhtar and Junaid, who helped very much, and to Ethan Devitt over there, who supported with her appropriate comments at the meetings, and Francis Deacon from LPPI as well at our 4 meetings, all of which were virtual. And just to say yes about the priorities in the one that we were reviewing, which was from November 2018, there were 2 main priorities, which is the Appendix B that's with the report, which were climate change and corporate governance. Those are still among the enlarged number of 7 priorities that are on page 113 of the cover report that Sean referred to, but we've included some others there. The original document, there were the 2 main ones I've mentioned, plus some others that were going to be looked at. So now we've got the 7 within the ESG, 2 of which are environmental, 3 of which are social, and 2 of which are corporate governance. As was mentioned, that came up in the questions and answers in the presentation and the workshop earlier, fiduciary responsibility or fiduciary duty is certainly a key, if not a prime consideration, and that's mentioned towards the bottom of page 113 of the covering report. So whilst the ESG priorities are very important, then we must still recognise, and that's why we looked quite a lot about a definition of fiduciary duty that was missing in the original document, because that still remains a key thing to act. The pension fund and those who manage the pension fund have always got to work on the best interests of the current and future beneficiaries of the fund, not least to ensure there's enough money to pay their pensions. And finally, just to mention, yes, what Sean referred to, the dashboard type of report. That, of course, is the Appendix B that was with the previous agenda item we've just been looking at. And for this, we looked at the Appendix B that was at the September meeting of the committee as a starting point. And yes, there are some suggested changes, improvements to that in the ORI implementation and monitoring via that dashboard that should be coming in to the next one that comes to the January meeting, hopefully. But as Sean has said and was referred to in the report, there are some more substantive changes that have come forward as suggested in the working group. We're going to have a further meeting subject to what officers with Sean and Francis Deacon of LPPI come up with as to how we can implement those. So we're proposing to meet again at a date to be decided towards the end of January, early February. So with that, I'm, as the chair has said, we're open to comments from others now, but I'm happy to propose approval of the new document.
Okay, I was just going to ask William, I know the pension board have looked at this, and William, do you wanted to make any comments?
Yeah, we reviewed it at our last meeting. I don't think I've got much to add to what has already been said.
Open it up for Councillor Clifford.
Excuse me. Yes, page 113 has ESG priorities, which are all very worthy. I'm always interested in the sources of information. How is this monitored? Who is doing the research? How often is the research on modern slavery, human rights, climate change? These things we would all subscribe to. But who, as it were, keeps in touch? Is it annual? How do we react to changes? Should there be military coups? Should there be relaxation of democratic standards where we are investing? How is this? Where is it coming from, the info?
Okay, I'll ask Chris to make a comment on that. I mean, basically, LPPI work very closely in the overall responsible investment field, and they have an officer, Francis Deacon, who's been to this committee before, and I think you've now got 3 other employees who are looking constantly at different events in the world. Clearly we're looking at world markets. We also work very closely with LAPFA, who are the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum, who look in detail at a lot of these issues. And I'm on the exec committee of that body. So Chris, I don't know if you want to say any more.
I'll be very brief. I haven't got much to add, except to the context is the portfolio is a very complex portfolio invested in all sorts of different areas. So the way that we operate is, this is obviously your policy. We also have our own policy. One of our policy requirements is to respect yours. So in all of our engagements with third-party managers, we will share these policies. And there's then a huge matrix of individuals. So where we're directly investing in something, then we'll obviously be looking at some of these themes in there. Where we're appointing a manager, we're putting in a contract with the manager to make sure they're directly engaging in some of in these areas. And so it is a very kind of complex web of bringing that together. I think the point that Sean made at the beginning that is going to be critical is then thinking the best possible oversight reporting that can come back to the committee in the years ahead, so you can monitor where you are against this policy. And I believe, as Sean's mentioned, that's something that still needs a bit of conversation in terms of what's going to be the most useful reporting for you. So that's what we'll continue to work with Sean and his team to determine what would be helpful from your point of view.
Thank you.
Yes, a fortnightly reading of Private Eye's columns is sometimes very useful for ethical investment. Yes, that's okay. I understand everything depends on trust, but I'm just concerned about how we could react individually as a pension fund, as well as relying on other sources. Things happen, and as you know as well as I do, pension funds and investors are often embarrassed by sudden events or news events that come to light. It's as simple as that. So I wanted to be assured that there was that safeguard in place.
Okay. Agree with the reassurance? Yeah. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I know I'm asking a few questions today, but yes, it's good to read this report. Just have a bit of concern really over this fidelity, whatever it's pronounced. That's it. Because we've always talked in the past that we have to get the best for the fund, for the pension, for the future, for people who need to receive a pension in the future. So how is this going to happen? Unless there be a conflict of interest between this and the net zero campaign as well, because we've always had this, and we've always mentioned that we have to get the best outcome for the pension. We're going down the road of responsible investment, which is always difficult because we always say we have to get the best outcome for the pension. So how is that going to conflict with that?
I think the whole point of fiduciary duty and certainly the IGCC net zero commitment we've made is that they're very aligned. They're not in conflict. So the climate risk that we're concerned about is the climate risk that's going to impact the fund's returns. It's not an ethical stand, if you like, from our point of view. Hopefully it's correlated with an ethical stand. But absolutely, I don't think they're in conflict at all. There are real and genuine risks from climate change on the value of the investments that we hold in the portfolio, and understanding those risks is critical. Now, we have to also bear in mind that those aren't risks for every company we invest in, so you've got to actually work out where the risks are and focus your attentions there. But I don't think there should be a conflict. I mean, if you didn't have this statement in here, that's when there's a risk of there being a conflict. If you start to prioritise, well, we don't really care about the pensions we're going to pay tomorrow. What we cared about is this, that, or the other. I think your policy is consistent with both paying the pensions and taking into account the kind of responsible investment risks that you've identified here.
Okay, I mean, clearly we're looking at short-term, long-term, medium-term, everything. And LPPI keep us well on top of that. Councillor Dowding.
Thank you, Chair. I think that we did a good piece of work. I'm personally disappointed about one thing in this report, because this piece of work was triggered by a campaign group that were asking us to look at investments by Israeli companies in the occupied Palestinian territories, and somehow not wanting to name any one nation state in this policy, we've actually got a very misleading sentence here, which I understand that we might not want to name and shame Israel in our statement, because there are other democratic countries that are also occupying territories. Very few. The only other one I know is Morocco. But basically, I think we've missed the point here that we expect democratic companies operating within democratically recognised nations not to be exploiting those territories that they're occupying, and this first sentence under the human rights has really missed the point. So I hope we might come back to that when maybe it's seen as a less sensitive issue, and we might get the essence right, because I think, as was pointed out here, that this is about really not wanting to support bad practice by companies, whether they claim to be operating legally or not, but looking at international regulations on that. With regard to how we look at this, I think that there is still an important piece of work to be done around the dashboard, and so we're coming back to that. And I want to recognise, because I think sometimes our poor staff, or the poor staff who get tasked with this job, feel quite beleaguered about the amount, the scale and the size of the task of looking at all the different things they have to do. And the officers really have a very, very complicated job at LPPI in monitoring and evaluating what actually is happening in the investment world. But having said all that, I still hope that at some stage we will look to not just a direction of travel, but actually outcomes. Because, just for example, with the fossil fuel companies, we still recognise that we're still assuming that they might change their practice. Fossil fuel companies might become not fossil fuel companies anymore, but they might become renewable companies. I don't know how we live with that expectation or that aspiration, but at some point, you know, even LPPI has adopted a net zero carbon deadline. So at some point we'll have to say, well, these companies are really not going to manage that. You know, that we're wasting our money, we're wasting our time and our efforts with them. We might just as well divest and actually invest completely in something else. So I'd like to see more of that target of when we say, this isn't working. You know, these methods, the engagement, the voting globally, the resources we're putting to that actually isn't having any effect, and so it's time to switch. So I understand we are still hopeful. Maybe it's a fool's errand, but we're still hopeful that if we do all this engagement and voting, that these companies are going to change their practices. I hope that we decide at some stage more of the same of our activity isn't getting results. Let's do something different. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to take up a few minutes there.
Okay, thank you. I mean, clearly the Palestinian issue is an ongoing issue. I know the Scheme Advisory Board are particularly looking at that later on in December, so we may get something back on that. Councillor Timofeta.
Thank you, Chairman, for that. I just would like to express my thanks to the members of the committee, which I think they worked very hard in producing such a comprehensive report. They might be a little bit here and there to adjust, but in my opinion, they're doing a fantastic job, and I'm very grateful for what they have done in trying to improve the situation. And the Appendix A is quite, you know, it looks to me that it's quite a good thing to have in the way the committee has, you know, dedicated themselves to produce such a good report. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Wesley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to thank these working group that came up with this. I think that it's been proposed that we approve it. I would like to second that.
Okay, all right, and we're all happy to approve the RI report? Okay, thank you. Councillor Whittle, I've missed you apparently. Go on.
Burden on me that what I've got to say now has got to be really good, rather than moving to the phone. No, I think, I mean, in many respects, there's a sort of continuity between the two policies. I can't see any major changes in our mandate to LPPI. I'm quite pleased that it still embodies the idea of good stewardship of our funds, that we do, we are responsible and we're not just giving money over to what would traditionally been guys in suits who just go off with our money and magically come up with them. We've still got an active role in that, and that's embodied within across the sector and across society, I think, about good stewardship. I'm quite pleased to see that active investment is still in there, and and from what Chris Rule says, we will actively invest in making a change on climate change and things like that. I mean, one observation is that, as was raised earlier, it seems a bit old hat now. I would have thought banging on about fiduciary duty, because I mean it was in the old thing, and I mean to say that it has to be added in, it's a bit like, I suppose it's a bit like saying all reports that go to the police authority have to be prefaced by we will uphold the law, we will protect citizens, we will do this, we will do that. I mean, it runs through. I mean, I can't recall a few years ago, when we had big long discussions about do we start investing in emerging markets, whether fiduciary duty was highlighting much about that. But I mean, I find let that go. If people just want to keep state what more explicitly, then that's I'm okay with that, because I do think Chris Rule's right that I think the old idea that you can get good returns from good investments, and I think that's there's lots of good things to invest on that are socially responsible and would be ethical, and we can make good money, and LPPI have proven it, and I hope will continue to demonstrate it. That's all. So I support the report.
Okay, thank you. All happy, we'll move that one. Right, item 10, urgent business. I haven't been informed of any urgent business. Item 11 is programme of meetings for 22-23, so I'm sure you'll all get those in your diary. All meetings will start at 10:30, but I've no doubt we'll be having some briefings that begin at 10. The date of the next meeting is the 11th of March 2022. And now, exclusion of any press and public before we move on. I'll just wait a couple of minutes till I get the nod from Mike to say carry on.